Nancy and John are both partners and husband and wife. So, מי שמכם יודע מה זה אומר להיות בעל ואישה וגם לעבוד כל כך הרבה שנים ביחד, it's not too obvious. So, please.
Hello, and thank you for having us here today. And after following Ami, I'm afraid that he's going to chastise us because we were asked to talk about really tall buildings. So we'll do that. It's been very interesting so far listening to our colleagues, and we've talked a lot about community and vertical community, and I'm going to be speaking about that tomorrow. Today, what we wanted to talk about is actually the building of tall buildings. John and I have had a firm for just over 30 years, and we've built 86 buildings. And there's a craft and a persistence for an architect to work with a developer and find out what the mission and vision is for the target market, and then build something that is a unique experience. And we'd just like to show you some of our work. And the first thing we're going to do is, when we have our 30th anniversary, typically in New York City, people throw these amazing parties, and it's one night and it's over. And instead, we decided to really reflect on our first 30 years, and we developed an understanding of the 6 pillars that really drove us as a firm. And one of them is called Height is Perception. And we just wanted to share it with you. It's just about a minute. And because I think when we talk about tall buildings, everybody talks about taller, taller, taller. But we as architects and urban designers really feel that we as architects and developers have a great responsibility to the earth, to the people at the pedestrian level, and to our cities and our towns. So I just wanted to share this with you. So when we envision a building, and this is a building that's built in New York City, we see how it relates to the world around it. The way it communicates with the skyline. This is a 60-story tower. The way it engages with the sky, and it feels the rain, and it skims the clouds. A building has the power to make you fly, to raise you from the ground looking up, to a view that only birds can see. And our work is about creating buildings that inspire, spaces that excite, and that are great market makers within the cities that we work. This is a diagram of some of the buildings that we have built in the last 5 years, and I think that we dream, like every architect dreams, of a more sustainable world, creating vertical community, creating gardens in the sky, which everybody is doing, and gardens at the base and pedestrian levels. Part of the challenge for us as people in the building world is to get it done and really to realize it. So these are all buildings that exist, and we've worked very closely with developers and local neighborhoods and contingencies. And we've done everything from the 3-story buildings that Ami spoke about, up to our tallest building is just over 1,000 feet high in Manhattan. And what's really important to us, as you can see, is every building is different because it responds to context, it responds to client, and it responds to the city that it's in. And we're just going to show you just a few of the projects that we have completed.
Thank you. So the first project that we want to talk about is a 60-story tower that was completed a couple of years ago. It's called One Madison. It's probably one of our most iconic buildings. It seems to be very well known. I get people, or I speak to people from out of state, and tell them about our projects. They seem to know this one. And it is a building that actually started in 2007 and was under construction in 2009 when the recession hit. But we were very fortunate because the building was entirely closed up, and actually there were 12 apartments that had been sold. It's a condominium project, and so there were people actually living in the building, but only 12 buildings living in a 60-story tower. It was very interesting for them. I want to talk a little bit about how we built in New York City, and how do we wind up with the ability to build such tall buildings. This building also was something that was not seen for a while in New York because of its slenderness ratio. It's over 600 feet tall, and it's 60 feet wide. So it has very, very small floor plates, 3,600 square feet. There's 1 or 2 apartments per floor. And so the structural challenges were very interesting, and we're fortunate that we have our structural engineer here later who's going to join us to talk more about this building. So with the combination of very dynamic structure and a system in New York, which I'm not sure you have quite the same thing here in Israel, but in New York City there's something called a transfer of development rights, TDRs. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? So it's a tool that has been used to essentially create taller buildings on whatever the footprint is, because the adjacent properties are, the air rights are purchased from these adjacent properties, and that is then transferred to this one individual site. So here, if you see the diagrams, I don't know if this pointer works, I'll try it.
John,
Use the mouse? Okay. Well, I think it might be almost obvious. So in the left-hand corner is the property, and the property ran from 23rd Street to 22nd Street. So it's what's called a through block. So the tower was placed on the portion of the lot which is the widest, which is 60 feet wide, where it could go straight into the ground. There was a smaller piece that ran to 22nd Street, and that was a very, very different street, and you'll see how we responded to the design there. But the primary issue here, the thing that I want to show, is how basically the second image on the left, upper left, shows you the development potential without the transfer of air rights. The next image shows those air rights being transferred to the top of the building, which obviously has the greatest value for the development, as you see there. And so it results in a very, very tall, slender building, because they're basically stacking up all that floor area. And as I said, that the slenderness of the building required us to use mass dampers at the top, in this case water-filled tanks, which reduced the sway of the building so that it was comfortable and within tolerance for development. So the building responds to the street in 2 very different ways. On 23rd Street, where the tower is closer, is a very commercial and busy street. So there, the commercial fabric of the ground floor continues, and there's a lower podium that the tower sits on, and that podium has all the amenities within the building, pools, gyms, and so on and so forth, that are located in there. On the 22nd Street side, which is a very, very beautiful street with low-rise masonry buildings, the facade is treated very differently, where there's an integration of porcelain and glass into the facade. Now, structurally, conventionally in a small tower, you would want to put all the structure along the perimeter of the building to give it the stiffness that was required. Here we used a totally different concept where we created a cruciform of structure within the building. And this is not literally, but it is essentially the way it works, with only then 5 columns, additional columns around the perimeter, so that it opened up the interior and the space to every corner. So the space moves, the interior space moves out toward the views, which are very, very dramatic in this part of town. So what we were also able to do, because in a residential building in a small footprint, how do you create a mix of apartment types and create apartments with terraces or porches? In this case, what we did within the forms is that there's a portion that's cantilevered where we cut out every 4, 5, 6 stories to create an apartment, a single floor apartment, which then created this really interesting terrace. Now, the other interesting thing in New York is that when we started on this building, the site was not totally clear. So there was the 60-foot portion, which we could go down into the ground. There was a McDonald's on the site next to us, which would not break their lease. So we had to design the building in a way so that we could start building the cantilever above the McDonald's. So part of the building design came from this combination of zoning, of site constraints, and the desire to create a mixture of unit types all together into one building form, which also contextually responded to its location being very close to the MetLife building. There's another iconic tower from a different era there. We didn't, in this case, want to mimic the design of the past, but create something new and vibrant that would sit within this neighborhood.
The next building we wanted to talk about is our newest baby on the skyline of New York City, which is called Arrow. It's a 68-story tower. People have moved in. It's a rental building, and people are very surprised that it's not a condominium building. And I think it's a result of being clever about where we use our clients' money and developing a form that really responds to the site. It's 426 apartments and 765 feet high. And basically it was a mid-block site with massive office buildings around it, and here was this residential building, and so how are we going to differentiate it? And we really looked at the site and how to place the massing on the site. And what we had was a subway tunnel below our site, so we couldn't build on a portion of it, and we literally sculpted the building within the zoning to create the tallest building that we could, not to be tall, but to maximize light and air in the building. And what you can see on the lower right-hand side is we basically, the building twists and then cantilevers out. And it's almost like when a flower reaches to the sky to find the light, it twists to create view corridors in between the other massive buildings. The other thing about this is, and talking about gardens in the sky, this building has outdoor pool on the base and on the top of the building, but in order to get the residential buildings high enough to get the right kind of light and air that we wanted, is we created a podium that's equivalent to about 10 floors. There's a 30-foot high retail space and then 3 floors of 20-foot high amenity space. And you can see it after it was just planted. And basically, we call this, it's like an Italian hill town in the middle of New York City. The plans on the right show you that you can literally walk from the lowest level of the outdoor amenity space up 4 floors in a continuous garden that wraps the building. So it's like an oasis in the middle of the city. This past winter, we're in the middle of winter, so all of the flowers are not out yet, but you can see that there is this amenity that residents look down on that is very sculptural and very exciting, and then residents participate in over 40,000 square feet of amenity space. And the skin on this building is a unitized curtain wall, and we call it like a stocking that was put over the skin, and it serves two purposes. One is to create solar protection, and the other thing is it's a metal, what we call fenders, and it reflects the light into the apartments to make them very bright. And it looks like a very expensive building, but this exterior fender is really made up of 6 parts that are combined in different ways and makes it look very custom, but was very cost effective to build. And this is standing on the parapet yeah, this is an actual photograph. So the end corner positions morph into terraces that are protected from the sun, yet you get these amazing views, and it's really become an icon on the profile of Manhattan.
So in this project, we took a slightly different approach. Context is very important to us. You know, we work, a lot of our work is in New York City, and context is something that we see every day. We have these amazing Art Deco towers, we have modern buildings, we have quite a mixture of building typologies that have defined the city. The building and the cities have been defined by their tops, by the way that they relate to the street. It's very, very important, but they're also sometimes defined by who the person is that's building the building. You know, so in this case, we were designing this building for the Rockefeller Group, and they created one of the major icons of New York City, which was Rockefeller Center, which has a very, very strong connection to the Art Deco style. So we wanted to do something that would commemorate their kind of reintroduction into the market of building residential buildings, because they hadn't built a residential building for over 50 years in New York City. And so in the conversations that we have, you know, between client, architect, marketing teams about giving a building an identity and a story, it's very, very important. And story, every building has a story as one of our pillars. So we look for those stories, and then we try to bring those elements of the story into the design. So here you see a building that really is that the client is very proud of, that is marketing very well and selling very well because of the way that the story pulls together. Some pictures here that shows the kind of analogy of Rockefeller Center and some of the beautiful sculpture that you find there. The building forms as well, and we certainly wanted to sculpt this building in a way that would give some hint of that connection, especially at the base and then at the very top where the building sets back. So you see it on the right. This is an analogy. 3 other pictures here are actually from Rockefeller Center during construction. Some of the renderings that were done for that, and then our building here, which we call Rose Hill, which is a connection to the neighborhood that it's found in. So you can see here as well that the top was very, very important, that it be sculpted in a way and lit in a way so that it would give that connection, but also take its place in the skyline of New York City with so many beautiful Art Deco buildings, but not necessarily something that was a total copy of another building, but really was our interpretation. And we feel that in design, we're always interpreting. You know, we're interpreting how things come together, styles and color and materials. Technology, certainly for a building like this, is 21st century. It's not replicating stone and masonry from the past. And the elements of the building design and skin are something that we love to play with in the way that it reflects on the skyline, but also how the building receives the light and how it creates the shadows and textures that make buildings very, very successful. Their buildings can be all glass and do sometimes the same thing, but we try to bring a texture and a depth to the facade, and that's what we're doing here. This was a picture during the testing of the mock-up. You can see some of the elements for the vertical pilasters and the metal work where we introduced the chevron, and also on the right, the picture of the screen that's going to form the part of the upper tower. Here it is under construction. It was topped out last week, and the skin continues to go on. It will be finished in about a year. So our tallest building right now is at 45 Broad Street. And here another, I think, interesting story about how the city has tried to bring developers in through incentivized zoning to create good for the city as well. In this case, our site is adjacent to the Fulton Street train station, which in this area has no elevator access. So a handicapped person has to travel many, many blocks to find a place where they can actually get into the subway system. So through the bonus availability here, we'll be building 2 elevators that will connect into the subway, not directly in our site, but actually about a half a block away. And for that element, the building was allowed to be increased from a 12 FAR to an 18 FAR. It's a combination of commercial on the lower part of the building and residential above. And it is a building where also is very, very slender. This slenderness ratio is about 20 to 1. So again, our structural engineer was brilliant in bringing some ideas into the design, which would allow for the building to be built in a somewhat economic structural way. The building will have twin mass dampers at the top of the building, but it also will have 2 areas where the floors are cut out, which is open, which will allow the air to pass through the building. And here you see a study that we've done for a way to treat the facade of the building and to enclose that floor without basically leaving it totally open. So the metal work of the facade actually is woven into that space there so that it creates this effect. And those spaces are, here you see a rendering of one of the areas on the lower part of the building where the residents will have access to it. The space in the upper, there's another one that's much higher up, which is actually too windy for anybody to use, so that one will stay open. So I want to talk about this building in Toronto. It's not a very tall building. It's only about 25 stories tall, but the developer came to us, again, with a very narrow site of about 75 feet. And it happened to be on the block which was adjacent, catty-corner to a park. And what we understood from the brief and the discussion with the client was that the community was very concerned about the shadow that could be created by a tower on this park. And through the way that we now can design buildings, and thinking about them 3-dimensionally, we decided that the building, in order to reduce the shadow on the park, the building would not just go straight up, it would actually twist, so that during the middle of the day, the shadow, the width of the tower would actually create the smallest shadow on the park when people were actually using it. And so that was something where, again, this is a building which is very contextual and very specific to the site that it's located, and that's exactly the way we want to work. So that's why in our presentation you see different styles and different thinking about how to solve the problems of building. So after we designed this building and everybody was so excited about it, of course we presented to the community. They said, well, we don't care about the sun hitting the park. So it's too tall. So where in New York City the zoning is very clear and you know essentially how many square feet you can build and if you're in a contextual zone or not, we found that in Toronto there's not that specific rule. So it's really kind of a give and take. And so designers and architects are in Toronto constantly negotiating with not only the developer, but also with the city on what the right form is, and then also with the community. So that's the situation we have here.
And basically to end, you know, everyone looks at tall buildings and the form they create on the landscape, but a building is not successful unless it really works with its interior design. And we're going to end with just a few projects that have recently been built. This is a project for MacLeod Properties, who designed 432 Park, and we've just finished this building, another building, and basically in all of our work, we aim to create something that is crafted and humane and creates a sense of home, but is very inspirational. Another tower we have going up on the, that's up on the Upper West Side, and another building we finished this year. And that's it.